Across the United States, hundreds of people have reported encounters with strange children who appear without warning on lonely roads, at gas stations, outside of apartment buildings, and standing on front porches long after midnight. At first they seem normal, young, polite, soft-spoken. But according to the people who encountered them, something always feels wrong immediately. A deep sense of dread witnesses struggle to explain afterwards. And then they notice the detail that appears in nearly every account. The children's eyes are completely black. No whites, no pupils, just solid black. And almost every encounter ends the same way. The children ask for permission to come inside. The phenomenon known as black-eyed children has become one of the most infamous paranormal cases of the modern era. Over the years, stories have spread across internet forums, radio shows, paranormal documentaries, and late-night call-in programs. The details vary slightly depending on the witness, but the core experience remains disturbingly consistent. The encounters almost always happen at night. The witness is usually alone. The children appear suddenly, and despite looking mostly human, the witnesses describe an overwhelming certainty that they are standing in the presence of something deeply unnatural. One of the earliest and most influential modern encounters came from a journalist named Brian Bethel in Abilene, Texas during the mid-1990s. According to Bethel, the experience happened one evening while he was parked outside of a movie theater using an ATM. As he sat in his car after finishing the transaction, he heard a knock at the driver's side window. 2 boys stood outside. They appeared to be between 10 and 14 years old. Nothing about their clothing immediately stood out. They looked ordinary enough at first glance. One wore a hooded pullover, the other wore casual clothing appropriate for the weather. The older boy spoke first. He explained that they wanted to see a movie but had forgotten their money back at home, and they needed a ride. Simple enough, but almost immediately Bethel began feeling uncomfortable. Later, he described it as an irrational fear. Not a suspicion or nervousness, but real fear, the kind that bypasses logic completely. The boys continued talking, and according to Bethel, the way they spoke felt strange, too formal, almost controlled, rehearsed. They weren't behaving like nervous kids asking a stranger for help. They spoke with complete confidence. The older one assured him that everything was fine. They just needed a ride. They just needed help. All he had to do was let them into the car. Bethel hesitated. Something in his body was telling him not to unlock the door. Then the boys became more insistent, not aggressive or threatening, but focused. The older child kept trying to maintain eye contact while calmly repeating that they needed to be let in. According to Bethel, the fear became overwhelming at that point, and finally, he looked directly into the boy's eyes. Solid black, no visible whites, no pupils, just completely black eyes staring back at him. Bethel panicked. He rolled up the window and drove away, and as he pulled out of the parking lot, he glanced in the mirror. The boys were gone. That encounter would become one of the most widely circulated black-eyed children reports ever documented, and after it spread online, other people began sharing eerily similar stories. A woman in Vermont claimed she heard knocking on her front door late at night during a thunderstorm. When she opened the door, 2 children stood outside, a young boy and a girl, both pale, both expressionless. The boy asked politely if they could come inside and use the phone. At first, the woman felt guilty hesitating. The children looked cold, wet from the rain, young enough to trigger immediate sympathy. But something felt deeply wrong. She later described the children's voices as strangely flat and emotionless, robotic and empty, like they were imitating normal human interaction without fully understanding it. The boy repeated the request. They needed to come inside. They needed to use the phone. And according to the witness, the children seemed oddly fixated on crossing the threshold of the house. Not asking for help in general, not asking her to call someone for them, they specifically wanted permission to enter. Then the woman noticed the eyes. Both children had completely black eyes. According to her account, the fear hit instantly. She slammed the door and locked it. Moments later, she checked the window and the children were gone. No footprints, no sign that they had ever been there. Another frequently cited encounter came from a man driving through rural Oklahoma late one evening. He stopped at a gas station shortly before closing time. As he filled his truck, he noticed 2 children standing near the edge of the parking lot, watching him. At first, he ignored them. Then one of them started walking toward him. The child asked for a ride. The man felt immediately uneasy. Later, he described the sensation as pure dread. Not because the children had threatened him or done anything hostile, just instinct. Every alarm bell in his body was telling him to leave. As the child stepped closer, the man noticed how pale he looked, sickly, almost colorless. The child tilted his head upward and the man saw his eyes. Solid black. He immediately got into his truck and drove away without even finishing pumping gas. According to his account, he looked in the rearview mirror while leaving and saw both children standing motionless in the parking lot, watching him disappear down the road. Over time, the reports became increasingly widespread, and despite small differences between stories, certain details appear again and again. The children almost always appear at night, travel in pairs or groups, speak politely, ask permission to enter homes or vehicles, and trigger an immediate fear in the witness, and all possess completely black eyes. Some witnesses claim the children seemed confused by normal social behavior. Others described them as strangely formal. Several accounts mention outdated language patterns as though the children were mimicking human speech rather than speaking naturally. And perhaps the strangest detail of all, many witnesses claim they noticed the fear before they noticed the eyes. Like some part of their brain recognized the danger immediately. One woman in Florida claimed she encountered a black-eyed child outside of her apartment complex shortly after midnight. She had just parked her car when she noticed a young boy standing near the stairwell. He calmly asked if he could use her phone to call his mother. At first, she agreed. But as the child walked closer, she noticed something wrong with the way he moved. He didn't limp or twitch, but he was moving just slightly unnaturally, like someone trying very hard to imitate normal movement. Then the boy looked directly at her, and she saw the eyes. According to the witness, panic overwhelmed her immediately. She rushed inside her apartment and locked the door while the child remained standing outside silently. No pounding or yelling, just standing there, waiting. Several minutes later, she looked through the peephole. The child was gone. Paranormal researchers have spent years trying to explain the phenomenon. Some believe that black-eyed children are demonic entities. Others believe they are extraterrestrials attempting to imitate humans. Some theories suggest they are interdimensional beings. Others compare them to ancient folklore surrounding vampires or supernatural visitors that require invitation before entering a home. That detail, the need for permission, appears constantly throughout the reports. Witnesses consistently describe the children asking to be invited inside rather than forcing entry. And in many supernatural traditions, thresholds matter. Homes are considered protected spaces. Something malicious cannot cross into them freely. It must first be allowed in. One particularly disturbing account came from a retired couple living in rural Maine. Late one winter night, they heard knocking at the door. 3 slow knocks. Then silence. The husband opened the door, expecting a stranded motorist. Instead, 2 children stood on the porch, a boy and a girl, both wearing hooded sweatshirts despite the freezing temperatures. Both completely still. The boy asked politely if they could come inside and warm up while waiting for their parents. At first, the request sounded reasonable, but according to the husband, something immediately felt wrong. The children showed no signs of being cold. No shivering, no visible breath, nothing. And neither child blinked once during the interaction. The wife appeared in the doorway and immediately felt sick to her stomach. She later described an overwhelming feeling of danger unlike anything she had experienced before. The children continued calmly asking to come inside, patiently, politely, repeating the request over and over. Then the husband noticed the eyes, completely black. He slammed the door and locked it immediately. According to the couple, the knocking continued for nearly 15 minutes afterward. Not violent or frantic, but slow and steady, 3 knocks at a time. Eventually, the knocking stopped. When they looked outside, the children were gone. No footprints in the snow, no sign that anyone had been there at all. As the stories spread online throughout the early 2000s, the black-eyed children phenomenon became deeply embedded in internet horror culture. But unlike many paranormal legends, the core idea remained remarkably simple. No elaborate mythology, no massive creature design, no complicated lore, just children appearing at night, asking to be let inside. And somehow that simplicity may be exactly why the stories work so well. Because children are supposed to feel safe, harmless, trustworthy. Black-eyed children's stories corrupt that instinct completely. The horror comes from the contradiction. Witnesses describe looking at something that appears human, while simultaneously feeling certain that it isn't. And whether the encounters are paranormal, psychological, or something else entirely, the fear described by witnesses is always the same. Immediate, overwhelming terror. And maybe that's why the stories continue spreading decades later. Because even people who don't believe them remember them. There's something deeply unsettling about the image itself. Children standing silently outside your door late at night, asking politely to be let in, and knowing with absolute certainty that opening the door would be the worst mistake of your life.